As you probably read, there were three attacks against France today, one in Nice, one in Avignon, and one in Saudi Arabia against a French consulate. The one in Nice seems particularly gruesome, although it's not really getting reported very well. What appears to have happened is that two Catholic worshippers were beheaded inside a church, and a third was stabbed, probably in the neck, and ran out and then died shortly afterwards. So, and this was at 9 a.m. So the chances are that at 9 a.m. these people were there for a service. One of the people was a sexton, and another one was an old lady going there to say prayers. So it looks like people being beheaded in church during a church service. That sends a message. That's pretty clear. That's as clear as a Muslim can be about the intentions of Islam, the Islamic religion. And it's significant also that this today was Muhammad's birthday. Muhammad's birthday ran from sunset yesterday until sunset today, 29th of October. And there's dispute about it. There's sectarian conflict about whether it should be celebrated, whether it should be treated like just any other day. But in general, Muslims will see it as virtuous to say prayers and to venerate Muhammad on his birthday. And you venerate someone by obeying his commands. And the commands of Islam are very simple. You make war against and you kill unbelievers. The golden thread running through Islamic doctrine is to make war against unbelievers until religion is all for Allah. And you do it through any violent way you can: death, mutilation, and more death. And this was about imposing death on Muhammad's birthday. That seems significant. So there seems to have been an underlying unison or unity of purpose, a pervasive unity amongst Muslim peoples, an understood unity for people who were unconnected, as far as we know, to engage in simultaneous attacks in Nice and Avignon, as well as the other one in Saudi Arabia. Now, I want to deal with three things. Firstly, my first point is that the French state is going to break down. France is going to break down. Secondly, this problem, it's not going to get solved. It can't be solved without the repatriation of Muslim populations out of France. That is the only way it can be solved. That's the way it will be solved, one way or another. The portents are not good for how it will happen in France. France is probably going to be the epicenter of European violence when all this comes to a head. Thirdly, what can you as an individual do? So I'll go through these 3 points now. Firstly, France is going to break down. The French state, the French system, it will break down. And you can see this in the pathetic, inadequate response from the French state. Macron got up and tried to talk a load of butch language, but basically what he has said, in summary, the summary to his statement was, quotes, "In response, my message is one of absolute firmness and unity. There is only one community in France, the national community. All of you, whatever your religion, whether you believe or not, must unite and not give in to a spirit of division. All citizens are deeply shocked and shaken by what has happened. Firmness and unity is our line today, and it is the line we will follow tomorrow." Now, to pretend that firmness and unity are the line in France today or tomorrow is like pretending that turning the other cheek was the line at the Nuremberg rallies. No, this is just lies. This lies in response to decapitations in a church by a foreign invading power. That is a sign that your system cannot survive. And I see no sign of concerted opposition to Macron's pathetic weakness and just outright lies, just telling what he knows are just lies. There's very little opposition to that at the moment. So I think that that is a sign that the French system can't survive in the long term. I think that the malaise goes deeper. Pope Francis, France is a Catholic country, it listens to Pope Francis, and his message is to look upon ourselves as brothers and sisters and not as enemies. This is in response to your worshippers getting decapitated in church, okay? So not as enemies, so that the beloved people of France, united, may respond to evil with good. No, again, wrong answer. Christianity doesn't say you don't have enemies or you shouldn't have enemies. Christianity says you should love your enemies and not hate them. Enemies are a fact of life. It doesn't mean you have to hate them. Hating them clouds your judgment. But Pope Francis seems to think that the worst thing we should do is to recognize enemies. Again, that is a sign of a civilization, a society that is unable to defend, will not be able to defend itself, and will break down. And finally, the final reason, the overriding reason why the French state is likely to collapse is that France is broke. It has been broke, admittedly broke, for a decade now. There's Michel Sapin, he was the French finance minister in 2013 under François Hollande. During, I think, one of his first press conferences, he got up, that is like the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rishi Sunak today. He got up and he said, there is a state, but it is a totally bankrupt state. And he was referring to the French state. So don't worry, the French state exists, but it's totally bankrupt. And he was right, it is totally bankrupt. Its debts and foreign debts are huge. Its pension debt alone is at least 5 times its GDP. There's no way that France is going to be able to continue its generous welfare state. There's no way the French state can continue to make ends meet. What's probably likely to happen one day is one Monday morning, a French finance minister will just get up and say, by the way, we've had no referendum, anything like that. We're simply leaving the euro. The reason why France will do that is because it will see it as a way to collapse its debts by if it leaves the Eurozone, the euro will collapse, and therefore French debts, which are denominated in euros, will collapse as well. It'll be a neat way to try and halve the cost of its debts, trying to make, if it can make a French franc float and have value, which it probably won't be able to do so, but I don't think that'll stop it. So France is going to break down. Second, this problem cannot be solved without the repatriation of Muslim populations out of France. Now, that actually puts it the wrong way around. I don't think it will turn out to be a question of removing people from your society, which is it's always a difficult question to answer because you have all these objections. It seems like a sordid task, and you're having to decide, what about this grey area, what about that grey area. I think it'll turn out to be a question of who do you invite into your society. That is a much easier, much cleaner, much harsher, tougher and more selfish and uncompromising decision that you make. You simply say, well, do we want this person in? If they're going to make trouble, why risk it? Not the question, has this person made enough trouble that we want to exclude him? So when the French state breaks down, the system will need to be reassembled from the ground up. And the question will then be, who do we include? Who are we going to invite in? And no Frenchman rebuilding society, rebuilding a system with other Frenchmen, no Frenchman is going to have any incentive to invite Muslims into his society as he's rebuilding it. Why would he? He'll simply say, no, it's not worth the risk. No offence, you're not coming in. And that way, if France is able to keep its head, which I don't think it will be able to, that way France will be able to accomplish that repatriation humanely. Now, that I think is unlikely. And the reason I think that is because the problems are just too great, and the French approach to this is too cowardly, even more cowardly than our own approach, and that is saying something. Now, to give you an example of this, Macron has responded to this beheading, or these beheadings, by saying that soldiers on the streets will be raised from 3,000 to 7,000 troops, and with troops also outside of schools for the return of children to school on Monday. Well, that's nice for French children. You'll have soldiers with guns welcoming you into school. Now, the problem is those numbers are tiny. At the time of the Charlie Hebdo massacre 5 years ago, the number of supposedly violent extremists that were on the radar of the security services in France was about 21,000. Now, if that's gone up by 50%, I think probably more than 50%, let's be conservative, say it's gone up by 50% in the last 5 years, that's a bit over 30,000 people, or 1/3 of the total of the French army, including civilian workers. So what you have is fewer than 3 French soldiers for every violent extremist that is estimated or basically on the radar screens of the French security services. So there's no way France has the manpower to deal with this problem. And the second reason why I don't think there's any way to deal with this issue other than wholesale repatriation is we are not seeing any widespread Islamic opposition to such atrocities. None that I know of. I don't know of any Muslim paid for snitch lines where people can rat out the terrorists to the authorities. So Muslims paying money, getting the volunteers to man the phone line so any Muslim can call in and tell their Muslim brothers and sisters, my son, my nephew, he looks like he's going to commit an atrocity, rat him out to the police. None of that is happening. It wouldn't work anyway. There are no million-man marches against these atrocities, despite what we're always told, that Muslims are the main victims of these anti-Muslim terrorist activities. Now, and on top of that, there is what I mentioned just now, the coordination of these attacks, the fact that there is a unison, an underlying unison with these attacks in Nice and in Avignon. I suspect people who didn't know each other still acting in unison. That suggests a pervasive underlying understanding of hostility to the French state and to French people, wanting to kill them, wanting to harm them. Now, you get official Muslim bodies coming up with the right form of words in order to condemn it, but it doesn't seem to go any further than that. Underneath the surface, under the ice, you have no shortage of people pressing home the victory. Now, the ex-PM of Malaysia, he responded to this by saying Muslims have every right to be angry and to kill millions of French people. Now, if France was a society, a system that had a hope of standing up, a hope of defending itself, it would take, how can I put it, the most sober executive security action against a man like that ex-PM, who is inciting war and genocide against French people. So, meanwhile, no solutions are getting offered. There are no one is even looking at solutions, just the same tired old assertions of unity and tolerance. There's quite a comical Twitter exchange today between Lawrence Fox and Claire Fox, an ex-MEP, saying, quotes, "We will do everything we can to defend freedom of speech." No, wrong answer. This is nonsense. The problem isn't speech. The problem is violence. They are different things. Organisations whose job it is to deal with violence, they're not concerned with free speech. Free speech doesn't come within their remit. I'm talking about the army, the security services, or the mob-handed riot police. They are not concerned about free speech. They are concerned about the balance of power secured through force. It is totally different. And no one is talking about how we achieve that. That is just not getting discussed. You're getting a lot of wind, and wind will not stop a knife. Now, this infantile failure to see things for what they are, that is likely to be paid for in massacre in France. I would expect France to be the epicenter of conflict between Muslims and non-Muslims in Europe. France's docile and cowardly failure repeatedly, ever since the car burnings, the car barbecues of 2005, when no one got arrested, despite, I think it was 10,000 cars getting burned. That failure, it's not one of policy, but of morality. And from one point of view, it's possible to say that nothing is ever the thing itself, but what it really is the moral or ethical qualities that it conveys, with everything else merely the fringe detail. And that point of view applies here. It is a moral failing, therefore it is a failure. And France's ethical failure bodes ill for when this whole problem comes to a head, because it means that when that happens, France is likely to lose its head, and that loss will be paid for in violence. So, what can you do? What can you as an individual do? Well, most of you watching this live in the UK, so you might think there's very little you can do. In fact, there is an awful lot you can do. The kindest thing that you can do for France or for anyone is to give them a good example in another country that they can follow. And this is why I stop mosques. I stop mosques from getting built because it is a good thing in itself to do, and it also means that when this comes to a head, it will be easier because there will be fewer fortresses for us to deal with. There will be smaller territory delineated for us to deal with. If you want to help France or any other country, the best thing you can do is to fund the costs of my work from stopping mosques getting built. Now, I still get many more requests to deal with mosque applications than I have the funds to deal with them. I get about 10% of the funding that I would need to go after all of them properly. And now that at least I should say, that 10% is 20 times what I was getting about a year ago, but it still isn't enough. If you want to help countries like France, or just to help us when all of this comes to a head, then there's no better thing you could do than to help me, to get me the necessary funding to fund the costs of stopping further mosques from getting planning permission. And you'll be glad you did.